So as I look out at all of you here today, I'm a bit chuffed really, because of why you're all here. You're all here because of marketing, obviously. But specifically in this case, you're all here because of content marketing. Once upon a time, I wrote an article for a magazine called Digital Times about game mechanics, the principles that were used inside computer games to make them engaging and addictive. And Michael read the article and contacted me and did some relationship marketing with his own. And Drew, we met, we had a chat, and we've been working together more or less ever since. So the second reason, and that inadvertently led to all kinds of things, including Dialog becoming the first agency to deliver the HubSpot system with an island. The second reason I'm here is because of frustration, because I've been using computers and technology for a long time, but for the last 17 years, all kinds of fantastic possibilities have existed to do digital marketing, but a lot of them were hard to get at. It was hard to do the cool stuff. It was a bit too tricky to implement the systems that made it so you could get really creative and let your creativity run free so you could engage people as much as possible. And because of that, most people focused too much of their energy on just getting the basics to work as opposed to fine-tuning their messages. And now we are here in 2014, and a lot of advances have been made, and we have systems that make it so you can focus on the task at hand instead of just getting the basics to work. Okay, so my name is Thomas O'Donoghue, it's my Twitter handle there, and I thought I'd begin with a couple of confessions. Okay, so my first confession is that I have absolutely no qualifications in marketing. It's not that I studied marketing and dropped out. I actually, I never went to college to study marketing at all. Everything I know about marketing I taught myself. And that might be useful for you because maybe I can show you some things that you don't usually learn if you study marketing. My second confession, I'm going to try and get this to work, is I'm actually terrible at football. I just wanted to prove this. And one of the reasons why I'm terrible at football is because I'm not really that interested. I remember when I was, 7 or 8 years old, and all my friends in school were collecting Transformers for, Transformer stickers for Transformer sticker albums, and that was cool. Robots that transformed into cars and back. I kind of understood that as a kid. But then some of my friends started collecting FIFA 86 stickers, and to me I just didn't get the same buzz out of it. So ever since then, I just haven't been that interested in football. I failed to make the A or B team in my secondary school when it came to football, and I didn't give it that much more attention. To just prove this, I just wanted to demonstrate that as part of not being very good at football, I'm also not very good at kickoff. So I'm going to try not to cause an accident here, but we'll see what happens. Okay. All right, so I might be able to manage like 3 or 4. Okay.
Pretty good.
Okay, so
Pretty good.
Okay, so my third confession, and this is the one I was debating whether I should share or not, but I figured, well, everyone is here to learn, is that when I was a teenager, I was actually very, very manipulative. And it just made sense to me to think about people's ways of making decisions and try and factor that in to get some of the things that I wanted. And I remember when I was maybe 13 or 14 years old, and I wanted to buy a Super Nintendo, and there was a kid who had one for sale in the local paper. And I called him up one day and I said, what do you have? What games come with it? How much is it? And he said, oh, it comes with like 5 games, an extra controller, and it's £180. And I said, well, let me just think about that and I'll get back to you. So the next day, I got my sister to call him, ask him what he had, and then say, that's really only worth maybe 80, 90 or £100, so I'll offer you 80. Okay? And like I predicted, he said, no, I won't sell it for that. A couple of hours later, I called him, and I said, I spoke to one of my friends in school, and he said the games you have, the controllers you have, it's really only worth 80, 90, maybe £100. So if you want, I'll offer you 100. And he said, okay. So me and my sister went to his house, bought the Super Nintendo, played it for a couple of months, and then I sold it for £180. Okay, so Now, as a kid, that was fun and it made sense to me. But as I grew older, I realized that if you manipulate people, it actually doesn't feel all that good. And the best type of manipulation is to bring out the best in people. It's more satisfying, it creates more enduring relationships, it creates a context where more value can be exchanged. So if I don't know anything, well, if I haven't actually been qualified in marketing, and I'm bad at football, and I'm at least formally rather manipulative, then why am I here talking to you all, many of whom are much more qualified in marketing than I am, at a conference about inbound marketing? Well, it's because when I was 6 or 7 years old, my father, who's a sound engineer, one of his albums did rather well, and he got a large amount of royalties. So my mum suggested that he spent the equivalent of 3,000 euros modern money on a box that he didn't understand, and no one really knew anything about, called a BBC computer. Okay, so on the left-hand side is a BBC computer. And so as a young kid, I got one of these. No one really knew how to use it. Back then, it was quite difficult to use. You had to type in games in order to be able to play them. But it created a subculture, around some of my friends where we were fascinated by computers. We always had to teach ourselves how they worked. And ever since then, I've been making sense of technology. But the second thing that happened was, because I got a computer when I was very young, my headmaster in school used to come and get me out of the classroom to fix his computer. And all my life, I had the experience of people much older than me asking me for help with computers. But in parallel, I would offer them suggestions as to clever things that they could do with computers. And most of them would say things like, "Oh, good for you, that's a good idea." And then they wouldn't do these things that made complete sense to me. Okay, so that was about 30 years ago. And on the right-hand side, I have my current computer, which is a Dell laptop. And so yesterday I did the maths, and I realized that my laptop is actually literally 1,000,000 times faster than my first computer. Okay? And approximately, it has 8 million times more storage. Okay? So 30 years of progress, 1,000,000 times more processing power. Why is it that we're not much more evolved than we already are? Why is it that so many people in the world have this great technology at their fingertips, but they use it to look at pictures of kittens and distract themselves perpetually? It doesn't really make that much sense. And so all my life, because I kept on having the experience of telling people things that made sense to me that they wouldn't actually do, I had to think and rationalize and make sense of this phenomenon. And this is what I've come up with so far. Okay, so the problem is to do with perception. So here we have a newborn baby, and as many of you probably know, but you might not have thought about it like this, when babies are born, they actually can't see. Okay, the world they look into is just globules of light. They haven't learned how to focus their eyes yet. They haven't learned how to decode all the information coming into their perceptions and translate it into something meaningful. So it takes about 6 months in order to learn to see. Okay, and I think this is fascinating. But with technology, the world is changing really fast, and a lot of us learn to see the world at a certain point in time. Maybe you made sense of things in college, and more or less you've been operating through that way of thinking ever since. But technology is changing visible aspects of our world. So you can see a little baby growing up, you can see a little baby learning to see. It's something you can watch. But in the background of our society, we have an incredible amount of bandwidth. And the only way you can relate to that is to see that a video loads faster. And you can't really tell from looking at the computer that it's 1,000,000 times faster than a computer from 30 years ago. Most of these things are kind of out of sight and thus hard to leverage. So many people struggle with perception of what's possible and practical. And in the gap between what they're doing and what's possible and practical, there's huge opportunities for everyone. Okay, so one of the cool things about having a dad who's a rather accomplished sound engineer is throughout my life I've heard all these cool and interesting things. And I'm fascinated because my dad has really amazing hearing. Sometimes, you know, I'll sit in a cafe and he'll say, oh, can you hear the low-level hum in the background? And I won't have noticed it until he pointed it out. But then when I listen, I can hear what he's talking about. Okay, so once upon a time, I asked my dad, you know, what's important about recording dialogue in a noisy environment? You know, how do you make it work? What happens if you're trying to record someone speaking in a pub? And he said, well, the level of background noise isn't too important, provided you can get a good signal-to-noise ratio, i.e., the person who you're trying to record is nice and clear and intelligible and easy to hear, and relative to the background noise. So one of the things you can do is if you put the microphone very close to them, the microphone picks up their voice, and everything in the background is relatively quiet. So even though there's some people moving, there's some coughing, the microphone is right, you know, it's close to me, so you can hear me much more loudly than any of the background noises, including the traffic in the background. Okay, so this is an old-style TV, and this is one of the ways I understand what's happening in the world today. So as you may remember, if you're in your mid-30s or older, once upon a time, before there were remote controls, you actually had to tune your TV in, and until it was tuned in, you had a screen full of noise. It was unintelligible nonsense, and it kind of buzzed. And then, if you were successful, you would find a channel which some of the time looked like that. Okay, so essentially, in order to make sense of the world, a lot of people have to tune in to new sources of information. They have to learn to focus, which is a little bit like looking at something abstract until they isolate a signal and they focus on it. Okay? And this is crucial for all your customers, and it's crucial for all your marketing, and it's crucial for how you focus yourself. Okay, so I just wanted to, at this point, ask a question. Who here, and please be brave, who here regularly feels either overwhelmed or overloaded by the sheer amount of information coming into your senses? All right, good. So about half of the room is honest. Okay, so and to me this is a side effect of the way our world works, because most people, your ancestors, they're only faced with a small amount of information, a small number of choices. They had to choose, what should they eat, how should they stay safe. Okay, but nowadays we are bombarded with messages, and I think that most people have struggled to adapt to this at all. I regularly log into Facebook and I see people posting on Facebook again that they're about to quit Facebook, so goodbye. Because Facebook somehow manages to steer their attention. Okay, so little kids learn to see. Okay, they learn to take the information of the world that begins like noise and turn it into some kind of signal, like an interface they can operate with. Then it gets a bit more subtle, because each person, according to their belief systems, their values, their emotional composition, and many other qualities, they see the world in slightly different ways. Okay, so, for example, some of the women here probably noticed other girls' shoes or maybe handbags. I know it's a stereotype, but it's true. Okay? Whereas a lot of guys might have noticed technology. It might have been the first thing that stood out to them. Okay? So everyone in this room isn't having the same experience at all. All of you are filtering information in different ways. All of you are tuning some information out and selectively ignoring other information. And this is happening all the time with your customers. And that's why if you send a message to one of your customers and it's not designed in the right way, probably you'll struggle to get their attention at all. Okay, so in 1981, Al Ries and Jack Trout, in their famous book Positioning, said, "We live in an over-communicated society." Okay, because they were witnessing a massive rise in the amount of messages everyone was being bombarded with, and noticing that most people were struggling to cope. Now, the early 1980s was incredibly peaceful relative to today, where a lot of you, even during this very conversation, you'll get distracted by Twitter updates, or maybe other people's phones beeping, or other people being engaged by background noises. Okay, and it may be difficult to focus. Now, even if you're not looking at your phone, even if you've got good habits about concentrating on being in the here and now, okay, probably part of your mind is curious about things, like maybe you want to check your email, maybe part of your inner attention is owned by how your curiosity has been organized. Okay? And everyone has this challenge all the time. Some people post pictures on Facebook in the morning, and then they're dying to find out how many likes they got, how many comments they got. Okay? And this means everyone's attention is perpetually divided. So next, I'd like to just do a little exercise to show you the nature of selective attention. Okay, so what I'd all like you to do is just sit comfortably. If you have a pen, just put it down for a moment, and I'm just going to lead you through something. Think of this as a type of mindfulness hacking, something I found rather useful. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to oscillate through a couple of different things that are present in your awareness. I just want you to begin to notice that right now you're focused on some things, but you won't be focused on the things I point out until I point them out. Okay, and just notice how your brain is focusing on some bits of information and ignoring others. Okay, so right now as you listen to the sound of my voice, okay, and hear the traffic driving past outside, okay, as you notice the sunlight coming in through the window, and then you feel the sensation of yourself sitting on the chair. Notice the feeling of your feet touching the floor, okay, and then again hear the bus driving past in the background. Okay, so if I simply oscillate through some of the things that are present in your awareness, you begin to realize that some things you're ignoring and some things you're focusing on. Okay, but what's happening with your customers is they're doing this all the time, because we live in an over-communicated society where the total amount of information is going crazy. The total amount of messages we're getting every day is going mad. I get, one of my email accounts, I get about 100 emails a day, but another one I get maybe 1,000. It's just not practical for me to even look at them all. Okay, so I just kind of skim through the most important things from people that I know, like, and trust, and everything else I ignore. Okay, so in order to cope with this new environment driven by information, okay, everyone is learning how to have selective attention. Okay, and this is true for your customers as well. But it's especially true if you come from a traditional marketing background where your messages may not be garnering or commanding the level of attention that you used to own, because now you're competing with Facebook and Google, who've evolved incredible behavioral technology to keep everyone paying attention. For example, I think it's fascinating that Mark Zuckerberg basically controls more global attention than anyone else on the planet. If he decided to, he could put an idea in the mind of the world, change the language of society. Maybe he could personally steer who wins an election just by changing the algorithms in Facebook, what's seen and what's not. Okay? And I think Facebook is fascinating because it's essentially a giant attention management game. Okay, so the second thing that happens is that when we have more choices and when we are exposed to more tricks, okay, we end up becoming naturally more skeptical. So when I was younger, I remember an advert, and the advert said, "Mars a day helps you work, rest, and play." Okay, so and as a kid, you believe in these things, and you see these pictures of these sports models who have pretty girlfriends eating Mars after swimming in a river, and it makes sense. But over time, when you learn about nutrition, you realize, well, maybe that's not exactly true. So I did the maths, and I realized that if you had a Mars bar every day for about 10 years, it would probably mess up your blood sugar levels. Okay, it would probably lead to a kind of minor, persistent mental toxicity that was not optimal for working. Okay, and probably it would make you fat, which might not make it so you play better. So as far as I can tell, the truth is, does a Mars a day help you work, rest, and play? Well, if you have a Mars every day for 10 years, you might end up with man boobs or something like that. Okay, so if you work as a man boob model, okay, maybe it does help you work, rest, and play. But apart from that, it's not true. So marketers for many years have been able to get away with messages because they owned a communications channel. Okay, and customers were ignorant. They didn't have enough awareness, they didn't have enough choice, they didn't have enough access to information. But now what's happening is everyone is teaming up and sharing insight with each other. So I can read about people who are angry about too much sugar in society, too much obesity. Okay? This is generating a whole culture of skepticism and distrust. Okay? So just as much as babies learn to see, so too, okay, consumers are changing their relationships with the messages that you put out there, and they'll naturally distrust you unless you earn their trust. Okay? And that makes everyone feel more powerful, because I can choose now to opt out of someone's messages. I almost never watch TV. I can control all the advertisements that I get exposed to, and so can everyone else. And so this is very empowering for consumers, but for marketers it poses a very interesting challenge. All right, so there's a few things I'd like to share with you which might help you know what to do. So this is a behavioral model by a Stanford psychologist called B.J. Fogg, and he says in order for someone to behave in a certain way, 3 things need to be true. Okay, the first thing is they need to be motivated to do whatever that thing is. The second thing is they need to have the ability to do it. It has to be easy enough that they can actually complete it. And if those 2 things are true, a third factor needs to be in place. They need to be triggered to take that action. Okay, so this is an incredibly powerful model that applies to both the use of technology for marketing as well as how it's applied to get people to take action. If you want your customers to give you information, if you make it so your form is too complicated, their ability is reduced because it's not super easy to complete unless people will go through that checkout process. Okay, equally, if you don't trigger people to take an action enough times, then maybe they won't take that action, even if they're, even if they can do it and they're motivated, they'll never think of doing that at the time. Okay, so the next thing that I'd like to offer you as a perceptual filter is something called the reticular activating system, which is your brain's autofocus mechanism. Okay, so if you have a debate with your friends about 4x4s or what your favourite SUV is, okay, you talk about this intensely for 15 or 20 minutes, then what happens over the next day is everywhere you go, you notice 4x4s. It's like your brain suddenly starts to identify some signals and ignore others. Okay, so if you can engage your customer's attention enough, you prime something called their reticular activating system. Okay, so their autofocus mechanism is getting ready to pay attention to other messages along those lines. Now, you might not control those messages, your customers might, but this is true for everyone all the time. So as I go through the world, because I'm not really that interested in football, okay, if people are talking about football, I just ignore it. Whereas some people who love football, they might jump into the debate, ready to prove how much they know. And the third filter I'd like to offer you is this, which is in order to own attention and to influence people, you need to understand the cycle used by some of the biggest social networks. So this is a model called the Hooked model by Nir Eyal, and it explains why Facebook is addictive. Okay, so Facebook loads our lives with triggers. Okay, so it might be that a friend tags you in a post, or it might be that somebody invites you to an event. Okay, so some of those triggers are external, i.e. you get an email from Facebook or you get a notification on your iPhone. Okay, so then you log into Facebook, taking an easy action. Okay, and you get somehow rewarded. You get rewarded by seeing something new, by being exposed to novelty, or perhaps by some kind of social approval because someone likes one of your posts. Okay? And then you take some kind of action that makes you more invested in Facebook, okay? Which in turn primes you to be more interested going forwards, and as you cycle through this, you end up becoming more and more ingrained. Okay, so if we trust the people who are influencing us, we let them influence us more. But if we don't, we fight against it and we don't let those messages in. Okay, so this comes back to my football metaphor. So earlier on I demonstrated that I wasn't particularly good at hiccups, but I think modern marketing is rather like hiccups. And if I want to make my life easier, I can cheat. Now obviously, if I use a balloon, okay, things get lighter. So technology is all about tools. Tools make us more powerful. And marketing automation systems like HubSpot make it so it's easier to ball in the air, because all of that power keeps it flying higher. Okay? And the trick is, if this is your message, you need your message, to kick it to the top of your customer's mind over and over again until it stays there. And if you can get it to the top of your customer's mind enough times, okay, whilst fighting the gravity of selective attention and their ability to ignore you because of all the other messages, the over-communicated society that we live in, if you can get it to the top of their mind over and over again using the tools of marketing automation, then you have a chance to have a very successful business. Okay, so the final part that I'd like to share is this principle of adherence. It's actually hard to adhere to using good solutions, and a lot of people struggle to stick to taking a medication that will save their life. So if a solution is effective and efficient, that's meaningless and kind of doesn't have any value unless you can actually stick to using it, unless it's actually easy enough for you to use. And that's one of the reasons why I love HubSpot, because HubSpot makes it so you can do all of these complicated, tricky, very advanced types of marketing, and it makes it effective and efficient to do so, but most of all, it makes it easy to adhere to through KPIs, through the dashboard. You're set up to do the smart things if you know what they are. Okay? And that makes it easy so you can focus on what's important. So, the principle of marketing, as I've taught to myself, is if you can get your message to the top of your customer's mind and they trust you, then they don't mind keeping it there. Okay? And if they can keep your message at the top of their mind, then you have power over them. But if they don't trust you enough, they might not let it stay. So if you have trust, and enough trust from your customers, then they'll happily let you help them become who they want to be, and your message can stay at the top of their mind. So, any questions?